I'm Shruti Bharat. In 2021, I had my beautiful son, and it's the best thing that ever happened to me. But I also realized that it was an emotional roller coaster. I wasn't ready for all the changes that happened within me and all of my relationships. But I also realized I am not alone. I accessed a lot of great content during this time, but realized that there just wasn't enough from an Indian context. And I want to do something to change that. Last year, I set up Beyond the Bump, which is a fully volunteer-run platform. And as part of the content offerings of this platform, I'm starting a new podcast called Bump In. It's an opportunity to meet a lot of everyday parents who share their stories of how they're not only surviving, but thriving inside and after the 0 to 24 month phase. So join me as we talk about the highs, lows, the madness, and the inevitable challenges with some laughter sprinkled in between. Be sure to listen all the way till the end for some important takeaways and some resources that might help support your journey. See you soon. Hi Divya, welcome to my podcast Bump In. I'm so happy to have you here with me today. I know it can't be easy to join me on a Saturday morning, but I really appreciate your time and I'm so excited about the conversation that we're going to have.
No, hi Shruti. I am really glad to be a part of this conversation, and thank you so much for having me join and share my stories. I'm looking forward to the conversation with you.
Absolutely. So Divya, generally how I like to start all of these chats, obviously we get into the weeds of a lot of things, but we'll take it a step at a time. I'd love to start off with who you are, where you are in the world, and tell us a little bit about your family as well.
Sure. So I'm based in Bombay, and a little bit about me. I actually grew up in Pune. So spent a lot of my significant amount of my schooling years in Pune, after which I moved to the US, where I studied for did my undergraduate degree there with liberal arts, psychology and Spanish, and then I started my career there as well. I started work as a behavior therapist for children with special needs at a non-profit there, post which I moved to a consulting role in Malaysia, where my parents were at the time. And then I moved I always knew I wanted to come back to India. I was trying to figure out in what capacity. So I moved back to India. I moved to Bombay to work in the social sector here, where I've been for the last decade.
Right.
and my family, I think we are a nuclear setup here in Bombay. So I live with my husband and I have 2 young children, one who is 5 years old and one who is 1 year old.
Wow, sounds like a really interesting trajectory that you had, and it's very interesting to know that you've also done some work in psychology specifically with children, and maybe we'll have another conversation about that down the road. So Divya, we met through a mutual connection, and our conversations have just been lovely, and I think I also understand that you're juggling quite a bit in life. I know you and your husband probably both working and also managing 2 small children, and that's kind of what I wanted to dive into with you today, and kind of share with our audience how that journey has been for you. But like I do in this first season of content, I really want to begin the conversation with your pregnancy journey and how your first child and you can share their names if you'd like as well.
Yeah.
But how that was, how was your pregnancy journey with both children, and we'll start from there.
Sure. So I could. My older daughter, who's Arya, she's 5 years old, and that was my first pregnancy. So I think that was both my pregnancies were very different. So just at the outset, to share that. But I think with Arya, the first few months and almost up to the second trimester was completely very smooth. But towards the end, I had to be very cautious with my diet and a certain amount of bed rest, and really be conscious with how I was managing. I was also working full time at the time, so just being able to ensure that I was eating, sleeping, etc. well. So that was towards the end got a little bit for me a little bit scary. Also, that was my first pregnancy, so my husband and I were a little bit more cautious and didn't have a lot of information as well at the time. So I think that was my first pregnancy, and that ended up being a C-section.
Right.
But overall, it was, a very smooth journey except towards the end. My second one with my daughter Sanya, who was born, she's a year old now.
Both
with her, it was
girls, it's
actually
lovely.
both girls. Yeah, I actually, it's truly
That's
something
lovely.
I'm very, very happy about.
Yeah.
But yeah, with Sanya, it was actually very smooth, very uneventful in that sense throughout. It was really a good time because I think you also knew what to expect having
Yeah.
gone through it once. So,
Right.
the same kind of flags didn't scare you or things like that. You kind of also knew where to go for what kind of help or support you needed. And that ended up being a natural birth. So I think it was just a very
wow.
starkly different experience with both.
Yeah, wonderful. I mean, so nice to hear your story. How was your emotional journey post your first child and the second? Did that change as well? I know the physical journey, certainly you were a lot more prepared and knew what to expect quite literally. But was emotionally the journey any different the second time around?
Yeah, I think so. The first time, I wouldn't say I was a very, both me and Joy, my husband, we weren't very, I wouldn't say paranoid or worried parents from the start. I think it was just the way we maybe are or whatever our personalities. We weren't like, oh my God, what's going to happen, and panicked about things like that even in the first pregnancy. But I think with the second pregnancy and with Sanya coming, and joining the family, I think I was a lot more focused on Arya, my older daughter, just to ensure that she wouldn't feel out of place. She wouldn't wonder what's going on. She was the first grandchild and the first child in our family, and it's very, very, everybody's attention and focus has always been on her. And so she also was going through her own transition. She was moving to a big school, and so a lot of those things were happening. So I was very, very focused on how she would kind of transition into being an older sister with a newer baby coming in. So I think so much of my time was spent planning for that and hustling around and being there for everything that Arya had going on, that I didn't almost focus on the first few months with my younger baby. But
yeah, I hear that a lot. I hear that particularly, there's I suppose a generation of parents who, are very conscious about, first of all, having a family, and also really being thoughtful to the impact of another child on the first child, right? And trying to create almost a safe space and be attentive to both children's needs in some sense, which I think is a wonderful development, but I'm sure it comes with additional mental load in terms of having to sort of balance so much, and I'm sure we'll get into that. Divya, what about you as a journey to becoming a parent? What do you think were some? I mean, you'd have to tell us a little bit about maybe what you were like before kids, but what was that change for you like?
So I think it almost feels like another lifetime ago in a sense.
Another person.
Another person.
Yes.
But I think even I think pre-babies or pre-having children, I think. I was always very independent. I always, I enjoyed my work. I had been living outside of home for quite a few years. I'd lived across a few different places. So for me, I think that had been, that is still very much a core part of me. But at the same time, I felt like I always wanted, children, and that was something, and I always knew I wanted 2 children. So even with my first pregnancy, I kind of always knew, okay, this is one and this is going to happen again. I think I always kind of wanted that. But I did try to, I think when you kind of get caught up with, especially with 2 kids, with so much of stuff with both of them, with the house, with work. I also work full time, and so sometimes you don't, and this is common for all moms, right? I'm sure you can relate. There's not so much time for you to go back to things that you enjoy, but that's one of the things I tried to consciously incorporate, and I still try to do. So whether it's just going out, I love my own time, that's just something I like, whether it's just reading or going for a run or whatever. So I think those are things I still very much try to do now consciously, because I feel like mentally that just makes me so much more resilient and happy as a person to be able to be there and enjoy time with my daughters. So I think, spending time with a few of my friends or with my family and making time for those things, I think I consciously now try to do that, because so it doesn't feel like what I did in my life post, or rather pre-children, is starkly different from what is kind of going on now. Of course it is, in terms of responsibilities, but I think at the very core, I've tried to maintain some balance, if that helps.
Yeah. And no, that's so good to hear, because it reinforces the idea that it's possible, that it can be done, which is an important message for people listening. And I think after a lot of conversations that I've already had as part of building out the podcast, there are a couple of themes that stand out, and I wanted to share and see whether this is something you resonate with. Which is, I think there's career trajectory, and also the fact that you're a very independent person and you're self-reliant, and you were also very conscious about having a family and having 2 children. So this is all very intentional decisions going into this. I think that intentionality comes with a certain maturity and age, and I think there's a lot more. I'm hearing a lot more about people really leaning into having children a little later on in life, in their 30s and such.
Yeah.
What is your take on this? And do you think that has that played out for you in any way, or what has been your experience on that perspective?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question, and I feel like it helps. It's, at least personally, I feel like it's helped me, because the 20s, you're really trying to figure yourself out. You're almost trying to figure out your career. Not that at 30s you've always figured it out, right? You might still be in that process. But I think you know yourself a lot better. Even in terms of finding a partner, right? Like my husband and I were together for a few years before we decided to get married. And then we spent some time together before we started a family, which was very much post 30, for both my girls. But I think it just gave us a sense of knowing each other, what we enjoy independently as a couple. It gave us a chance to grow together and independently before we decided to make that move. And I feel like when you maybe have a baby post 30, whether it's 1 or 2, and if you decide to, and that's the path you take, it just, you somehow know a lot of the things intrinsically, maybe like you said, with age or with experiences. Or maybe your peer groups have also evolved to making those decisions, so you have a lot more people to lean into as well. And so it just gives you some advantage, I feel, that if you kind of wait and figure it out. But
absolutely. I share the same story. I think I've known my husband a very long time, and we'd been married a considerable amount of time before we decided to have a family. And this, I don't think I'd have it any other way. I think I was a lot better prepared emotionally, physically, and certainly financially for the responsibility that came with it, right? So I completely understand. Divya, you touched upon an important point about being a nuclear family, but also being working parents, you and your husband Joy. I often, in conversations, I know it's almost like an inflection point where, 6 months after the arrival of the baby, there's often a reflection, where you're saying, what is the path I choose here? Because I may be able to get another job. I'm probably, replaceable in other realms, but not as much in my family. Whatever, and stayed on your career path through having 2 children.
Honestly, Shruti, I feel like it's it is a balance or a juggling act, and I know everybody relates at a very, very daily, very real thing that happens every day. But I do want to say, I think with both my pregnancies, with both my children when they were both born, I was working full time, but I was very fortunate to be in organizations that gave me flexibility in terms of being able to come back to work even if it's not at the 6-month mark, but if I needed to extend it. So I remember with Arya, I extended my maternity break by a few months, and then I went back, eased into it, and I was really able to, and given that was my first baby, I didn't even know at that point, should I go back, should I not? So I was almost weighing that decision right at the time, and I think my colleagues gave me that space to figure it out. And similarly, I think with Sanya's time, with 2 children, it gets even harder. So while I went back, after my maternity break, I'm vocal that I'd like to have some sort of flexibility. I don't want to go all in, and I'd like to take it at my pace. And I think, again, I was truly fortunate that my organization gave me that. Because if they hadn't, I think I'd just, and you hear this from so many moms, right? That burnout is so real, because you're trying to manage so many different roles and navigating so many different things. But like you said, I'm not somebody who can kind of just go away and then come back in my... And while being present daily looks different on different days, I think it was just important for me to I think even call that out at work, that
Right.
there will be days I leave early, there will be days I still work from home a few days a week, and so all of that flexibility, being vulnerable and sharing my situation at work, I think, and having folks kind of resonate and support me, and my circumstances, I think that really helped. But it is a challenge on a daily basis. But honestly, I also realized that being at work helped me kind of also enjoy my own time. So whether it was
Right.
going into the office to do work, I remember that there was this work travel that came up a few months after I went back to work. And I had to be away for 4 days, and I was just like, should I even go? And that choice was very much up to me. But I was like, you know what, I really want to go, to just be away from the house, be away from kids, and just do things that I liked doing before I became up was something that really helped. So I think finding that balance between the two is something I try to do at a daily level.
No, there's so much to unpack in what you've shared, but I want to share a little bit about my own experience as well. I think initially it feels like you've exited one world and you're going into another, because you've been in this bubble of being with your baby literally day and night. And to then move yourself from that and go back to anything that feels like a former version of yourself feels a little bit alien, actually. I think
Yeah.
I remember also just not even knowing what to do at work, or not even like remembering my job anymore.
Yeah.
And just being a little bit cloudy and vague about that. But I think once the dust settles and the clouds part, you're kind of getting back into the groove. I definitely struggled with guilt, with never feeling like I was doing enough on either side. I don't know where this was rooted. At the time, I don't know what I was benchmarking it to, of not being able to work like I used to, right? I don't think I was able to put in the hours and the effort that I was doing before. And accepting that took a little bit of doing, right? And it wasn't and like you said, I don't think anyone was really externally putting that type of pressure on me. I think it was more my own sort of accountability that was driving that piece. But I do think that, Divya, we both probably have a lot more flexibility than, say, a lot of folks are probably accustomed to or have access to. I'm wondering what has been your lessons or learning in advocating for yourself and having some boundaries around what you can and cannot do, especially like you said with 2 kids. There's a heck of a lot of logistics to manage in terms of just getting through the day. How have you practiced those kind of boundary setting and self-advocacy, even if you work in a place that's relatively more flexible?
Yeah, so many different threads to your question, and I think I'll try to go into all of them. But I think, so, when I initially went back after Sanya, which was the second time I went back, this is a lot more, there's that recency bias, so I remember a lot more of, things I went through. But I think initially I didn't almost want to be like seen as a different person, because you're going back and you want to almost, or at least I want to be like, oh, I've been here, and I know what to expect, and expectations from me as with anybody else. And that was, Shruti, hard, because I think if you put that pressure on yourself that no, you should kind of expect a new mom to do the same kind of things and not act like they're a new mom with other responsibilities, that can be too much pressure on yourself. And I started to feel that initially. So I then, really had to reflect, come back and speak with, my husband and family, and just try to, tone this down. I can't physically, possibly mentally be at the same level as other people, right? Because I had 2 kids, there was so much logistics on a daily level, so I would just end up crashing out if I didn't kind of take it slow. And so I very slowly, I think, started to then mold into this, I guess, identity where I'd be comfortable saying at work that no, I can't do this call, or I'll step back from this because I have 2 children at home who are young children who need me, or I need to go and feed my baby, or those kind of things, especially when she was much younger. So I think just being comfortable with calling it out is something that actually takes a lot of effort. At least it did for me at the time, right? Like, no, I'm a mom, and because somewhere you feel like you want to blend in, but nobody can actually just hide their own intersections and blend in. So I think that took some time. But when I was able to navigate that, where I actually started sharing that no, I have this at home, or I think even my colleagues or my peers started to understand that okay, you have this, and then there was it wasn't like their expectation changed. It was just my own mental kind of maybe load that kind of just reduced with not
Yeah.
having so much to expect out of myself, and just telling myself that it's okay to kind of take it slow this year or for the next few months, and then kind of ease into it when I'd be more ready. Because the one thing I do tell myself all the time is I really actually enjoy being a mom. I really feel very blessed that I have two wonderful girls. So for me, I think I come back very daily, and it's a very real thing where I actually feel a lot of gratitude that no, they are not going to have this stage of their life is not going to be something that will come back. So I need to be present, and I need to prioritize this over anything else. And even if that means there are some longer days at work or in other parts of my life, then I will try to make up for it in the next few days. But yeah, I think just getting comfortable with taking it slow and not having that pressure for yourself is something that I had to learn and give myself the space to do.
No, that's such a useful insight, and something that I felt as well. I think when I eased off myself and stopped trying to be a version of myself I had in my head, I think I was actually starting to do a lot better on both fronts, right? And I also think, like any job, the job of being a new mother is also something you learn as you go. It's not something you kind of come fully loaded and equipped with the day your baby is born. And I think that's a certain grace and space we don't often give ourselves, because we've just sort of been, we're almost like grown up in a culture of hustle. We feel like we need to be at a certain pace all the time, and there's even a sense of scarcity. I don't know if that's something you've observed, where I often hear this. This is more. I suppose I've heard this more from generations that are a little bit ahead of us, where it's almost like a zero sum. You're either you either have a career, and if you take a break, oh my god, it's the end of the world. All your work up till now is kind of completely gone away. I don't think I fully subscribe to that belief. I think it's really about a story now, and I also think there's a lot more acceptance for breaks today than there ever has been. So it's both parts. What's your take on that? Do you think breaks are the end or just a comma?
No, 100%, just a comma. I think breaks are, and now I think more than ever with so much to learn with, like you're saying, the generation ahead of us, but also from like Gen Z, right? Like there's so much interaction with them. When you hear from them, and also when you look around, I think the world has changed so much that there are so many more opportunities for women at all stages, right? Whether you're a caregiver, whether you're a parent, or whether you just want to take a break, I think we have the ability and the choice to be able to do that. Of course, that comes with a lot of privilege, and I'm not going to deny that, but I think there are options, and even the perception of like somebody coming back, I know people who've taken a break and are planning to go back or have resumed work. I think the perception is not like, oh, you were just chilling for a few years and now you've kind of come back. It's very much that you needed to work on something, and there's a lot of respect for what you did, and now you're kind of coming back and switching gears again. So, and I know Joy and I speak about this also at home, is for parents or for people in that situation to advocate for that in their workplaces, right? Like if if maybe Joy as a dad can start to share that he has responsibilities at work and he needs to leave, or me as a mom say that I need to feed my child and hence I need to go home early. I think other people start to feel comfortable by sharing their own like version of whatever's going on in their own lives. So I really feel that starting to speak about it actively and making others, even if that may be a little uncomfortable at the start, it just really helps to kind of lay that groundwork for other people as well in this space.
Absolutely. Divya, you were sharing earlier in the conversation how work has also been an important part of helping you feel like yourself. Expand on that a little bit. Why is it important, in your perspective, to feel like yourself in the motherhood journey as well? Because you're not what you used to be. You're probably a much better version or an improved edition of your former self, but
hopefully
I certainly feel that there is some superpowers that come with this experience. But what has that meant for you? Why is work such an integral part of actually making you a better mom?
I think So when I was on my maternity breaks, right, or even on when I wasn't actively working at the time, I just felt like there was something that my brain was missing, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
there was so
absolutely.
much of like, and the logistics don't stop now. Like it's not like after the baby's small it kind of ends. It just maybe increases at a different capacity.
Exactly.
But I feel like for me to just go out and have adult conversations, talk about like the work that I enjoy doing, part of my brain, it also is a like a channel into my older life, and the goals and the aspirations that I had without having before I'd had children. So I think because I enjoyed that at that time, I felt like it is important in small doses, or whatever doses work for me. I think to go back into that and try to get some semblance of that, and then come back more rejuvenated the home in different whatever needed doing. But I think again, taking it slow is really really critical. I don't feel like you need to go all out unless that's what you enjoy, right? Everybody has their
Right.
own version or their own priorities. For me, doing it in small doses definitely kind of brought me back to what a little bit of my older version was, and helps me kind of navigate being a mom as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think
That's what's worked for you.
that's what so far has worked for me.
Interesting. And you also talked about how you've started to really blend in a lot of activities that kind of remind you of your old self. What if you were advising someone who is at the start of this journey, has maybe one young child or maybe even two?
Yeah.
What would be your advice on how to even start? How do you start to get in touch with parts of yourself, even if in small, slow ways, right? What were
Yeah.
ways you did that?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think for a new mom or another mom listening who might be in this similar situation, I think just give yourself a lot of grace, because I think we don't do that in the moment.
Yeah.
I at times didn't, right? I was just like, it needs to be like this, and just sometimes you just kind of really have a lot of pressure at times to do certain things. So just give yourself a lot of grace. Whatever version of your own life you want back, of course it's not completely going to come back, because you have like a human being that's completely relying on you. But I think if there are certain aspects that you can figure out from your own life that you want to do, for instance, for me it was like maybe a workout that I like doing, or going for a run or for a walk or something. I would try to maybe wake up earlier, just try to incorporate that a couple times a week. Or if it meant having a conversation with my sister for a longer time on the phone without being like called 10 times by my kids or something, I think then just stepping out to do that. So I think just trying to find time in
Yeah.
very small ways to do things that work for you, and it will come back, so don't think that it's the end and oh my god, how am I going to manage. I think just having the faith that things will kind of like this, extremely when your baby is very tiny, when things are hard, when you maybe at work you're also feeling that FOMO, all of that will turn around. Just give it some time.
Yeah.
Don't be in a rush, because when you on the other side, you shouldn't be feeling the guilt of, oh, I missed these critical milestones in my baby's life, right? So I think
Absolutely.
just enjoy where you're at currently. I know it's easier said than done, but find like one or two things daily that give you joy and try to do those.
No,
because
I fully relate to
yeah.
what you're sharing.
Yeah, and I feel like the logistics, I know you were speaking about this earlier, right? Like sometimes like how do you manage, and I'm sure you can relate as well, where you're out and there's like still 5 things in the house, like even if it's non-child related, but if it's like, okay, I need to order diapers, so you're sitting in a work meeting and you're like, okay, let me quickly just order diapers. So
Absolutely.
I've tried to rewire my head instead of thinking that, oh my god, here's another thing. I'm like, okay, I'll do this at the end of the day, or between my husband and I will break up certain things, and it's still very much a part of your life, but try to do it at a time that works for you.
Oh yes,
And
absolutely.
just find that routine, I guess, and be okay with no routines for some time also, yeah.
I can relate to so many things you're sharing, and I want to add in a little bit of my own experience here. I think
Yeah.
a part of having a baby, a very small baby, is I think the loss of control, which is very hard for I suppose those of us who've worked in a largely controlled environment, right, where you're either calling shots or you have a sense of how shots will be called by and large, one pace. And then when you start to get used to that and you establish some forms of routine, I think the load of multitasking is quite a lot. I certainly recognize that, where I was juggling a lot, whether it's work, household. I'm certainly the boss at home. There's just no denying that. I decide when, what, how, who. It's pretty much, I take that on most of the time quite positively, because it is it's clearly a strength between me and my husband,
Yeah.
for me to sort of take that on. But there's also times where I recognize that I was probably doing too much. Like you said, I was probably trying to achieve much higher standards than I was ready to deliver on a daily basis. And I think just exercising that self compassion, and sort of being okay with a less than perfect scenario is a lesson. It's a journey, and I think once you get there, you're much easier on yourself and everyone around you. It definitely takes some doing. You learn the hard way at times, but once you get there, you feel like you gotta have a handle on things. And I think the point you made, really just avoiding multitasking, right? Because that just ends up putting a lot of stress. You're almost sort of all over the place and really nowhere, right? You're neither with your child, you're neither at work, you're neither with present with whoever you're with, and that can be quite overwhelming, overall. Earlier this year, I was I'd started my son off at play school, and he was only doing an hour. I was also getting my house remodeled, and I was at a very intense period at work, and I remember the juggle between the three. I was for the first time in a very long time actually physically feeling it, and that was really a signal to me saying, you're good at it, but don't push the limits of multitasking beyond a point. But it's interesting to know that I'm not alone. I'm not alone in that journey of trying to juggle too many things. Divya, what about you touched a little bit upon how you and your husband are often discussing and talking out things openly. How has your partnership been as parents, and what have you learned that you'd like our audience to also take away and possibly see if they can emulate some of that in their own families?
It's an interesting question, but I feel like you have to. So and I think you can also relate because you've known your husband for a while. I think because I knew Joy and I knew each other before we got married, when we were just dating and we were figuring out our work, etc. I think we've known each other in our different identities. So I think it's been interesting to see how we have evolved over time. I think there's a lot more patience that comes in, a lot more like ability to prioritize and know what's important, not getting like caught up in the really small things, etc. But I feel even there, like giving yourself grace as a couple is so important, right? Like you don't have to I know people will say, okay, you have to find time for each other also and manage the baby. Like sometimes it's okay if there's a week where you're only doing baby stuff, or there's a week where you're only busy with work, right? Like I think it's okay. You don't have to put that pressure because you're not going anywhere. Your partner is very much there, and if you can try to have that communication where, okay, this week's going to be really hard, or I'm tired, or I think keeping it real with one another is just been useful for us. And I think that's really giving each other space. I think Joy knows how I am. I understand how he is. Maybe he's a certain way at work, or he knows that I like my own time and I like to do my things a certain way. So I think just knowing that about each other and not having very high expectations that, okay, now you have to be a certain dad, or I need to be a certain way as a mom. That's helped. I think just keeping it honest and having that communication. And also asking for help. Like sometimes you don't expect the other person to know, like, that, okay, if I'm also managing the house or like all of this logistics, I need help here. So it's not for your partner to just assume that, okay, there's so much going on, because very realistically we also have so many hormonal changes, right after the and those are things that that I know a lot of dads may not even understand, because it's just a little bit like maybe not spoken about as much, or there isn't a lot of knowledge out there. So I think just giving each other grace in all of these moments, I think, and space is something that I would suggest is useful.
I totally relate. I think the fairy tale picture is actually more detrimental than any good. I think I've read articles that talk about marital satisfaction actually dipping significantly when a child arrives. So it's actually counterintuitive to the general advice that you'll hear. These old grandmom's tales about how have a child and your marriage is going to be like A plus. It's in fact just the opposite. And I think a part of it, maybe there's a lot more nuance to it, is also that you have to reset expectations. And I think you're right, is that I think maybe movies, pop culture has led us to believe that your husband or partner will intuitively understand your every need, will perceive your pain, will perceive your own confusion, when in fact I suppose they're going through their own journey. Right? Or maybe there's a good reason why they are in either direction, too much, too little, what have you. And I think you're absolutely right. Having a certain amount of, I said acceptance for the journey happening to both people is quite important. Otherwise, I think there's a lot of unnecessary resentment that can creep in, in those periods. But much easier said than done, and much better understood retrospectively, especially once you've gone through a few, tough spots. But I think as you communicate more, and as you also like you said, stop sweating the small stuff, and stop putting the pressure that your relationship has to be exactly what it used to be, because I have this very surprising source of relationship advice I'll share with you. So every now and then I happen to listen to an interview or read a clip from Michelle Obama, who I find
I love it,
very, very insightful, and she's obviously a fantastic woman and a great example of so many different things. And I remember once hearing about how, and she's been very open about how her motherhood journey and her journey being married to a really prominent man has been. But she's often said how you have to look at your own relationship as it's almost like a dot in a huge spectrum. I mean, how is 1 year going to change the 40 50 year relationship that you might end up having with this person? And when you zoom out and you put it into perspective, and you think about how this is a day in so many days, or it's an hour in so many weeks, then you start to feel the intensity of whatever you're going through at that moment feel a lot less. And I found that very insightful. I often remind myself of it. It's like, how people say that you're a speck in the cosmos. It's kind of like that sentiment sort of playing out. But
that's really
Divya,
nice,
I'm gonna
actually. Very relatable.
I like I said, a very surprising source of relationship advice, because she is obviously from a different world than me. I don't think there's any intersection whatsoever, except that we're both women. But she's a pretty cool lady, and she has some interesting things to say.
No, I think, and I really like that, and thanks for sharing. I think you do tend to evolve with one another over time, right? And your relationship will grow, but don't expect it to grow that minute. Like, just give it time, and you will notice that actually I feel like parenthood makes you stronger as a couple, because you're just dealing with so much, right? Like, you've probably seen each other at your most raw, at your most vulnerable, at the worst and the best, and so you can either use that for building something stronger, or it can just kind of not work in the way you want. But I think definitely using those moments to kind of see and continue to build together. But
100%. So Divya, as we sort of on this note sort of wind down our conversation, I'm going to take us in a more sort of funny direction, if you will. With 2 kids, I'm sure you have a lot of moments where you've watched yourself or them or your husband and really laughed out loud. Is there anything that comes to mind that you'd like to share in terms of a funny moment or an experience that you had as a parent? Is good to share, and you'd be surprised the number of stories that involve poop. So that's not off the table in terms of an anecdote.
To a lot of poop incidents for sure. But I think when you have these two very hyper, like both my girls are super hyperactive. I'm sure you can relate, similar age group with your son. But I think there's just so much of running around madness. Mornings are just I don't even know how it becomes like noon, right? And so I know my husband and I on weekends nowadays we found this new game or this new thing where we just pretend, and I think I actually saw this somewhere, which is how I got inspired to do it. You just pretend to lie down and be like, okay, we're just going to play like a game where we're in a forest, and me and my husband are just lying down with our eyes closed, and you all have to run around and build things. And now that my younger baby is walking and running about, they find it very exciting that there are these
Yeah.
two big adults just lying on the floor. So it gives us a good like space to just be while they kind of go crazy and run around and use up all their energy. But yeah, I think it's honestly, I can't think of one like funny experience, but I think just seeing both of them go crazy, the interactions that they have with one another, and their even fights now, which are quite exciting to witness. I think all of that is just really adds to my day and to this whole journey. But yeah, it's truly like fun seeing them go at it together.
Yeah, I think there's something really special about siblings, and I really do want that for my son as well. So let's see how that goes. Divya, another question. If there was a myth about pregnancy or early parenthood, now that you've got a considerable amount of experience under your belt, that you could bust, a myth that you could bust, or you think that is just problematic or doesn't serve anyone, not really worth pursuing anymore, and you had the power to remove that, is there anything that comes to mind in terms of busting a myth?
Yeah, for sure. I think Shruti, when I was pregnant with Arya, which was couple of years ago, some people said, "Oh my God, your life is never going to be the same. You're never going to sleep, and it's just going to now this is it." So I think, and I've actually seen
Life's
people
over.
telling life's over. Like I've seen people telling parents that.
Yeah.
And I just think that is so ridiculous, right? Like one, it's completely
Absolutely.
inappropriate to tell somebody who's going to have a baby that your life is over. So I think, yes, that life shifts, right? Priority shifts, but it's not like you're not going to sleep again. Yes, the first few months, years are probably very hard, and that you will have multiple sleepless nights. But you will get sleep again. It in a couple of years, you try and find, ask for help and whatever possible. You will still be able to go out and get a drink if that's what you enjoy. If you enjoy like weight training and you want your body to get back to a certain way, after a year or two you can start to do so. Whatever your goal is, right, whether it's work related or personal, it's not like everything halts. There's just a bit of a pause, and that's a choice that I think people have made all over the world, and I think it's your life is definitely not over. It's going to evolve in the most beautiful way, and as cliche as it sounds, I feel like my life has just become so much more full, but so much more exciting and nice with having these two children around, because I couldn't have had it any other way now that looking at it in retrospect. And I think for new parents to know that it's just a year or two of where you may not sleep and things are hard, but you will get back to whatever shape and form you want to kind of get back to. Just find your rhythm and enjoy that, so I think that's what I'd like to say.
I totally agree with it. I've received this advice as well, and it's far too ominous for me to accept. I do think life changes. It's not the end of the world, and I don't think it's very useful advice either, and actually kind of reflects probably the challenges that the individual had, that they really couldn't necessarily find the right kind of support. So I think I've shifted from being really put off by this advice to being actually a little bit empathetic towards what may have been their experience for having said something like this. Change is inevitable, but definitely not end of life, and I definitely don't take that defeated approach at all towards having kids, and actively reject the jadedness that comes with some of this advice. So I'm with you on busting that myth for sure.
No, that's great to know.
Divya, it's been such a pleasure speaking with you. I know that it's, like I said, it's a Saturday morning now, almost afternoon. I'm going to let you go back to the girls and enjoy the rest of your weekend.